Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabadis of Delmer, together with my co-host, Mark Ronich of Statewide News Service on jbiztechvalley.com.
Well, Rabbi Simon, we have a wonderful guest here today. We're going to be talking about the Education Investment Tax Credit, and one of the biggest groups who are pushing this and advocating for this is the Orthodox Union, and we have the policy director with us, Jake Adler. And wonderful. Welcome to the Jewish View.
Jake,
thank you for having me on.
Jake, it was absolutely an honor. Thank you for taking the time at a busy schedule, a busy time to come and join us. And I spent the last 3-4 hours with you this week, and last week I spent time going to all these elected with you and your team of 35 people to talk to all these top officials. And you got the attention of quite a few people. But first I want to ask you, as policy director, what is the job entail? What do you do as policy director?
I'm the New York State policy director, just to clarify.
Policy directors in a lot of different states.
I have counterparts in about 15 other states, and an overall person who oversees our entire state portfolio, and then another federal person as well. I am the OU's chief lobbyist in New York State. So I come up to Albany during session pretty much every day that they're in session, the entire time, from January to June. Mm-hmm. I also do New York City lobbying. So if anyone's listening in Crown Heights or watching in Crown Heights, I'm a point person for that too in City Hall. Basically just meeting with members about bills that are important for the community, specifically bills that are important to the Jewish day school and yeshiva community. That's really our focus. Other groups, kind of cast a wide net about different issues. We're really single issue minded and single issue focused on the tuition issue and the Jewish day school issue.
So the Education Investment Tax Credit is the tuition issue?
That is, I think there's a broader issue of tuition being unaffordable right now, and I think the Education Investment Tax Credit is the current approach, and I think the best approach right now to trying to roll some of that back and bring things back down to normal levels.
Well, what kind of headway are you making? Up here in Albany is, of course, the Assembly and the Senate, and of course the governor has to sign off on it also. So you got three parties.
Sure. Well, we, as you mentioned, we have the three parties in the room. So now we're in budget week. We have a few more days to go before the governor's going to insist on an independent, on-time budget. Excuse me. Baruch Hashem, we're making headway. The last few years since we started lobbying in Albany, we've had increases in CAP and MSR, which are funding.
MSR?
MSR is Mandated Services Reimbursement.
Okay.
Those are two funding streams that can go to non-public schools, yeshivas, Catholic schools, for things that the state mandates that they do already. We've had about 4% increases in that for the last few years. Historically, those were underfunded. There's about $350 million that the state owes the yeshivas and the non-public schools.
What do you mean owes? What do you mean
they have a funding level that they put into the budget every year, and then they just were not, for many years, were not allocating the money for it. So they were mandated to do a certain amount, and they just weren't for many, many years. So then you have this back pay that's this.
Well, why not sue for the money?
Sometimes you can't fight City Hall that way. So for the last few years, we've been lobbying for a down payment or payment plan for that money. And last year, Baruch Hashem, they included $16 million for that, to pay that debt down. $16 million is obviously not $300 million, but it's a start. This year we anticipate another 16, perhaps a little higher, but I don't want to count my chickens my eggs before they hatch. And Education Investment Tax Credit is just another way that we're trying to help the schools. The Senate has passed it for the last 3 years, independent of anyone else. They've come out very strongly and said this is a priority for us. The Assembly has never taken it up, but it has very significant support within that conference.
What's the fiscal estimate of the investment tax credit, education investment?
Sure, there's three proposals. This year the governor included his own version of the bill in his budget proposals in the beginning of January.
What's the fiscal implication?
It's anywhere between $100 million and about $250 million.
This would go to yeshivas or just really all private schools?
Private.
This
Catholic
would go,
yeshivas.
the way it's designed is take $100 million because it's the easiest number. $100 million would be split in half. So $50 million of that would have to go to public schools, PTAs, athletic organizations, things like that, and the other $50 million would be available for the yeshivas, the non-public schools, the Catholic schools, the Muslim schools, etc. So it's smaller than the overall pot, but the pot is really just two smaller pots, and there's a public component and a non-public component.
Okay, so the 50, but isn't this like a tax credit where, explain this, because people would contribute money and then be able to take
Right.
it off as a credit on their taxes?
So the way it would work,
But you said that it's the state giving the money.
it's
I'm not quite sure
the
what
state would set up a fund. The way it would work is the state sets up a certificate. In the beginning of January, you'd send in a certificate that says, I estimate that I have $5,000 and I'm going to owe the state in taxes. You're allowed to take 75% of that $5,000 and say, I'm going to give that to a scholarship organization in the community,
Yeah.
okay, instead of giving it to the state. So you're going to then spend 25% of that
Right.
overall bill in taxes, and then roughly 75% of that you can then send to a scholarship organization.
So does it work the same way for the public schools? Because you said playgrounds and music
Right.
and
It would
arts.
work. You would have
So
to.
do
You would have to
have
let
a donor to give that equivalent money, and then the state forgives it, so they're really losing, the state in a sense is losing that money?
Right. It would work the same way for the public schools for this bill. It wouldn't. You wouldn't have the same requirement of scholarship organization because obviously there's no scholarships to a public school.
They could be.
I mean, there would be PTA organizations. There could be other organizations,
They're
but
not paying tuition.
they're not
right?
paying
No, it doesn't
tuition the
matter.
same
You
way.
could still have, people can still contribute money to a public school.
No,
and have
100%.
Yeah.
Have the school named after them or something.
100% you can contribute money, but it would be more for art programs
Like you
or
said,
after-school
right,
programs
like you
or a
said,
playground,
have a
things like
playground
that.
named
It
after
wouldn't
you,
be
yeah.
a tuition scholarship fund like we
Right.
would have for the yeshivas or the Catholic
Call it
schools.
whatever you want to call it.
But
It's
it
the
would
same.
function the same way. It would
Right,
have to
function
be
the same
yeah.
way. So, again.
It could also be used, by the way, for things like teacher's choice, for extra teachers' expenses,
Right.
to
'Cause
get
teachers
them
do
more
take a lot of
more
out of-
supplies, things like that.
They take a lot of money out of their own pockets
100%.
to fund their classrooms
That's right.
and take care of their children and their students.
How much money then would be, bottom line, would go to yeshivas? I mean, again, there's so many different proposals and you can't really know, but let's take the lower, what you were trying to look for, $100 million.
It's hard to know. It's hard to know exactly what figure would go to the yeshivas, because we say we have a $50 million overall non-public school
Right.
pot to choose from, right? It's a matter of which donors get their paperwork in,
Right.
and which communities can get their donors mobilized fast enough to give that percentage, because once the pot's filled up, the pot's filled up. So what they would do is if they have more people that want to give and you've reached the cap early on, they'll write you back and they'll say, thank you very much. We understand that you want to donate, but we're going to donate 3% instead of 75%, or 50% instead of 75%. They'll just lower everyone's percentage that they'll let you give. That way it spreads it out a little more. But it would be, I mean, I don't want to say
round,
millions,
yeah.
but it would be,
Would be that high,
No, it could
a
billions.
sea change. It would be gigantic.
Well, aside from, out of the $50 million pot for the non-public schools, and you mentioned you have the Muslim schools and the Catholic schools.
But
and
we're by far the largest population of the non-public schools.
So you might get 20 million out of it. Let's just say, for percentage-wise, if everything remained equal,
For purposes of illustration, sure.
it could be $20 million.
Right.
And that would, now the mandated services reimbursement money
Yeah.
was, let's say, how much?
It's up to around $100 million statewide, and that's
Okay.
that's calculated based on how many students you have in each
couldn't
school.
they just couldn't the state just put in another, let's say, $100 million into the mandated services reimbursement pot?
Mandated services reimbursement, a little more complicated the way it works. It comes down. It's a formula based on how many students you have.
Right. But it goes
how
for
many
non-public
mandates you
schools
fulfill.
It goes for non-public schools
It's
also.
specifically for non-public schools.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that's what Kathy Nolan, who's the assemblywoman from Queens, who's the chair of the Assembly Education Committee,
Right.
she told me that maybe the equivalent amount of money would go into the mandated services reimbursement fund. and then that would be her, she'd feel more comfortable with that. And that would be her solution.
With due respect to Assemblymember Nolan, who is a very strong champion for the public schools, and obviously a very well-regarded Assemblymember, one of the main objections that Assemblymember Nolan and her allies in the opposition to this bill put forth is that it will divert too much money from the state's general fund and too much money from the public schools.
Well, how do you answer that?
But that's how Kathy Nolan answered it, by saying, well, we can put it into the Mandated Services Reimbursement Fund, and then she would feel comfortable with that, and then she would go in favor of it.
But my point on the fallacy of that argument, and I'm not in the business of insulting people's arguments usually, but if we can look at it for what it is, you're saying on one hand, I don't want to divert $100 million from public schools. I don't want to divert $100 million from the overall state budget. And then on the other hand, you're saying, I'm going to take a program which is specifically for non-public schools, which is cap and MSR, and I'm going to add another $100 million in. So you're
Or $50 million.
Or $50 million. So you're diverting the money from if your problem is diverting money from public schools, you're diverting money from public schools either way. In the education tax credit bill, it's a more impactful way of using the same amount of money, and it's going to give a component to the public schools as well. Whereas cap and MSR, it's much more spread out.
But in the realm of compromise, and with wanting to see the end goal and not having to do the fundraising component,
right?
Couldn't you simply accept that as a compromise? And when no one is happy, and then that makes it a good compromise when no one's happy?
I think there's really two issues here. For the last few years, under the last speaker and under this speaker, we anticipate it'll continue. The Assembly, the Senate, and the governor, really the governor, I have to give him credit, he's led the charge, has increased aid to non-public schools by about 4% each year. And we are immensely grateful for that. And that's tremendous for our schools. Thousands and thousands of dollars. This program would give 10 times that amount of money to schools. And you wouldn't
this
have to...
program,
the
meaning
EITC
would give 10 times the amount.
The cap and MSR, a school of 100 might end up getting $10,000 a year. Under the education tax credit program, you might have 3 $10,000 scholarships, 4 $10,000 scholarships. It depends on obviously how they set up the fund and whose fund they're in, but the potential is much greater there for aid to the public schools and the non-public schools. Whereas in mandated services, the way it is right now, you can keep adding more money to the pot, but the formula is set that it's going to be a certain amount per student. So the bigger schools are going to get a lot more money, the smaller schools are going to get a lot less money, and adding more money to the pot doesn't necessarily increase how much money it doesn't increase exponentially the amount of money that the school is going to get.
Okay.
We obviously want as much. We're grateful for whatever the Assembly and the Senate and the governor do agree on, and increasing cap and MSR is a wonderful start. I just don't think they're comparable. We're talking about a compromise. You want to trade me something that's comparable for something that's a little more tasteful for something that's a little less tasteful to me. So it's not a compromise. Isn't increasing a program they already have by a few $1 million. They're going to do that anyway, and again, I can't say it enough. We love them for it.
Right.
It's tremendous, but it's not.
What's 4% in real dollars?
It's going to be about, I believe it's about $98 million this year, and it's going to end up about $102 million this year.
So it's an extra.
It'll go up about $4 or $5 million.
Okay.
How does it look, though? What's the bottom line, though? I mean, this has to be passed, and you are a lobbyist, and you're, as much as you're working on it. I mean, and it's been going on for years, as you said at the beginning of the show. What do you say is the hope? I mean, I guess you have a lot of hope here, or you wouldn't be working on it, but you think it'll be passed this budget year?
Well, if you didn't have hope, you wouldn't have a job.
Well, I'm sure he has hope, and you have to be optimistic, but
we heard
realistic.
from, when you hear from, it depends what house of the legislature you're hearing from.
The
Senate and the Assembly.
I think I was just, as Mark mentioned, I was just on the mission. We had a group of 35, 40 people here today from Brooklyn and the 5 towns, and we had 3 other missions this year. This is the 4th and final mission for now. I'm open to more.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned for more. Depending on who you speak to, if you speak to the Senate, the Assembly is the problem. You speak to the Assembly, the Senate, and the governor are the problem. You speak to the governor, we did it, it's not us. And then it gets very frustrated because you get a lot of spin. And my job isn't to focus on the spin. My job is to cut through the spin and to kind of talkless, as they say, right? So, you know, a lot of people on my mission were getting a little disheartened that, like, there's so much spin and we come up every year and what's going on? And what I told them is that you have to take that frustration, right? You have to look at your tuition bill first. You have to take the frustration that you just looked at your tuition bill and then you just spent 6 hours, if you're coming from Brooklyn or somewhere, of your day traveling and another 6 hours here, and that you feel like you're getting doublespeak sometimes. And you have to take that frustration and you have to tell your friends and you have to call your assembly member and you have to call your senator and you have to call an email and you have to tell your principal and you have to tell your board, your schools. It's not enough to come to Albany and say, I'm Yotze. I'm done. I'm done for the year. Let the OU, let the Aguda, let the Catholic Conference take care of the rest. Let the UJA take care of it. It's not enough. You have to go home. This is your achrayus too. You have to go home. You have to tell your friends. You have to get on the board of your school. You have to get them to become politically involved and politically active until we're all screaming about it. We don't have to scream. We can talk friendly about it until we're all talking about it. And we're all willing to sacrifice a little bit of our time to help for it. We're always going to get drowned out by the louder people.
But what was interesting is that the Catholics and the non-Jewish schools were sending in, you know, tens of thousands of letters, and they got 3 from the Jewish schools.
Right.
And one of them was you.
Right.
So
had about.
So why aren't you getting more organized?
We've had about 300 or 400 go out statewide from our constituent schools, and that's going up every day.
But why can't you get more organized?
What's
stopping you?
I think every year the community as a whole gets more organized, and it is getting better. There's a lot more people in Albany. There are a lot more people in Albany with yarmulkes and tzitzits on, pushing for this issue this year than there were last year and than there were the year before. And that's a very good thing. Whether they mark for my organization or another organization or another organization, that's a good thing. Overall, people are starting to wake up and talk about it. I just think it's important to not get bogged down in so much spin and to take the frustration with the spin and with the fact that year after year after year, we're asking you to come back to Albany, But
it's not coming back to Albany, like you said. It's not like Yotze.
Exactly.
But why aren't they writing the letters? Why aren't you getting out there and getting to all the schools to get everyone's email addresses and telling everyone via email, this is the copy. Here's what, adjust it the way you want. But send it in to these people and this people.
So we are, and since this is going up online, sure.
Where were you in January with this?
We've been doing this in January.
Where were last year?
We've been doing it for the last 3 or 4 years.
Okay, but you only had 3 letters this year.
That was for one assembly member. That's for one assembly member. So that means that only 3 people in Far Rockaway sent it. Doesn't mean, I know Simcha Felder has thousands of them sitting in his office. So, I mean, it's not fair to say that there's...
Well, he didn't promote that. I thought it was 3 for the
whole... No. It's not fair to say that it's only 3 people in the entire community. There are people who are getting involved. We need more, obviously. We need thousands of people.
That's right. Tens of thousands.
Since I'll just throw in a plug here since I'm still on. If they want to go on to ouadvocacy.org/EITC, you can click the link and just put your name and your address in, and you automatically generate an email to your senator and your assembly member. And the governor, and it'll go, and that'll be the first step. The next step is to continue the process and start agitating and militating in the community and in your schools. We really need the schools and the shuls and the rabbis and the teachers and everyone involved, everyone to lock arms and to take care of this together. It's not going to be solved just by sending a lobbyist or just a mission of a few people or a few dozen people. So we need a concerted community-wide effort.
Okay, so now we get into the next machlachas, I guess, is the fact that you have the DREAM Act attached to this. And you have people like Walter Mosley, and you had Kareem Kamara, but you have Jesse Hamilton in the Senate, and you have other folks who, represent Jewish constituencies, but also feel akin to the DREAM Act.
Of course.
I heard a lot of people today from the OU who were deriding the DREAM Act because it's giving financial aid and scholarships to illegal immigrants, and your people, and here you have people who are legal immigrants who are here legally, and you're coming with your hand out, the Tin Cup Brigade, and you're saying, we want we want something for our own people.
Right.
And Simcha Felder said, be proud of saying that, don't be shy.
Right.
So, here you are, how is Walter Mosley dealing with this, and how do you feel Jesse Hamilton's dealing with this? And, those people who have to weigh both sides and hear from both sides, are they just supporting everything just because they don't want to be the bad guy, or what?
I don't want to speak for specific electeds.
Okay.
I mean, I can.
I brought the names up. So.
The job of an elected is to represent his constituencies. Now, if you have a constituency that's mixed, sometimes you have two agendas that are going to butt into each other and are going to come into conflict. That's okay. We understand that, and we don't expect our legislators to vote with us every single time. I have a friend who lobbies on this issue who says that, he says to members, you should, I understand you love NYSIT and you love the UFT, you love the teachers' unions. Do this much for the teachers' unions. Just do this much.
Right, for us.
Just do this much for us. And I think, to echo what Senator Felder said, and I'm not weighing in on the DREAM Act or not, there's a school of thought that says that our issues are issues bifnei atzmusa, as they would say, on their own, and they should be dealt with on their own.
Yeah, but you did weigh in on the DREAM Act. You said that you're supportive of it. You have nothing against the DREAM Act. You said that earlier today.
Right. The DREAM Act is not my agenda.
It's not your issue.
I'm a Jewish education advocate. I lobby for Jewish education.
I understand, but you have nothing against the DREAM Act, is what you said earlier.
It's
as a principle.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not my personally. I'm not speaking. I'm not speaking about my personal politics. The OU hasn't taken a position on the DREAM Act. It's not.
Okay.
It's not something that's in our bailiwick, so to speak.
Wouldn't you be playing nice in the playground, in the sandbox, if you did take a position, you did say, hey, we're going to support you, now come over and support us?
What I support is the education investment tax credit.
But
and however the Albany process needs to, whatever process Albany needs to go through to aid our schools,
yeah, but you can
I
have
endorse.
a kumbaya moment. When you say,
I think,
okay, guys in the Hispanic community, whatever, we don't have to support you.
I
think you are.
Maybe
next year that'll be.
I think you're right, and I think that has happened, and the tax credit coalition has reached out to. This isn't just a Jewish issue or a Catholic issue. No. And Assemblymember Crespo has had rallies. There's been thousands of people in the Bronx and in Brooklyn, all over, not just for the frum parts of the Bronx, the frum parts of Brooklyn, or the frum parts of Westchester. I'm talking about the Catholic schools, the Spanish-speaking communities. Those communities want this bill too. They want both bills. So there is this this relationship between the two bills. It's unfortunate that some elements on one side of the DREAM Act or on one side of the other bill want to make it a combative issue. It's unfortunate. That happens sometimes.
And I don't know if you've heard this, but I was with some Hispanic lawmakers last night. Assemblyman Phil Ramos had a little get-together, and I was in there. And I heard them talking about the fact that they said, why do we need visas and prove who we are when we come to this country, when the wave of immigrants from Eastern Europe, whether it was the 1880s or the 1940s, or they didn't need the visa. They just went right through Ellis Island. They went right in. They came into the country. They were fine. Everyone accepted them, and now they're making other new rules for us. And what happened to the Eastern Europeans when they came over? I said to them, well, it was a smaller country back then, and they didn't have the technology we have today, and they didn't have, I said, if the Eastern Europeans were coming over today in our world that we live in now, I said, you'd be sure they'd have to have, the visas and be subject to what you're being subjected to.
I mean,
and 50 years from now, when we have other immigrants coming over, it'll be a whole different set of circumstances.
Right.
So you got to look at it that way. And I was trying to advocate to get them off this this pedestal. You know.
Yeah, I mean, I think in many communities there's a split over it. There's certain people who are for everything and they're for the DREAM Act and they're for the tax credit bill, and there's other people that are for the DREAM Act and against the tax credit bill, and vice versa. It doesn't make them bad people necessarily. It means that we disagree with them on this issue. Obviously, my number one issue, I'm not an immigration advocate, I'm not an anti-immigration advocate, I'm an education advocate. So my number one issue is the tax credit and the aid to the schools. If that happens, however that needs to happen, let it happen, please God. I really don't like to wade into the other issues because that's for behind the closed doors, and that's for let Albany keep some of its dirty laundry behind closed doors. We don't
really. I like to have it and air it out. Transparency.
Well,
transparency
you're a
would be
reporter over here.
transparency would be great if you had
I'm
across
trying
the board.
I
think it's
sunshine is a great
I
disinfectant.
think it's I don't think it's fair to say that there's a tremendous schism between the two camps. I think they more or less get along. It's just there's a lot of political pressure for one or the other. And
okay, so let me ask you this: why would someone like an Ellen Jaffe, who's from Rockland County, Assemblywoman, be against the EITC when most of her constituents are from the observant Jewish community?
There's a strong belief that this bill would divert money from the state's general fund. That's really a canard because Ellen Jaffe herself has championed other tax credits. When she came out, she was circulating a letter a few weeks ago, and she said that she was asking members to take their names off the bills because it would divert so much money from the general fund. But I Googled Ellen Jaffe tax credit, and it comes up in her newsletter from June or July. She supported a tax credit for businesses to move to Rockland County. So, I mean, that's also diverting money from the general fund. If we're talking about $140, $150 billion budget this year, and this is a $100 million program.
Small potatoes, really, compared to what,
it's tiny.
It's tiny.
$150 billion versus $100 million.
Now, you can understand someone like the Albany Assemblywoman, Pat Fahey, is against it because she was a school board member. And there probably are a couple of other former school board members in the assembly. That's where their heart is. That's where. But
it's also a canard. I like that word.
Yes,
it's also a canard to say that it really hurts the school boards. If anything, it's going to give more money to the school boards.
Well, they know. You said the $50 million goes
right.
to...
It's kind of a myth to say this. The underfunded. Everyone likes to tell me that when I meet with members, the members who are in opposition like to tell me that our schools are underfunded. Our schools are underfunded. It's a shifting goalpost of what is fully funded, and that's the problem.
So let me ask you: when you have these group of 35 people, in the few minutes we have left, that you don't have them interact with a Kathy Nolan or an Ellen Jaffe or a Pat Fahey, why aren't you, sort of trying to bump into them in the hallways and have them talk to them? And explain that it's a canard and explain your feelings and your views. I mean, why just give up and say, well they'll never accept what we have to say?
We in our group meetings this morning, we did have a variety of members that were against the bill in various capacities, and our delegation did meet with them. Frankly, I'm not going to request meetings with people that I know I'm never going to sway. They've been approached. A mission isn't for that, I don't think. I think leave that to the professionals, leave that to the powers that be.
Like you.
Right. It's a matter of maximizing their time in Albany, really. And I think you want to get them an experience that's going to educate them further. It's going to get them activated more and more involved.
Okay, thank you.
ouadvocacy.org/EITC.
Okay.
Listen, Jake, you're doing great work, and for the Jewish community, and I even think for the entire people of New York State. And keep going, and much success. Hatzlacha Rabbah, and do it with good health.
Yeah, much success.
Thank you. Thank you very much.